that there were some good things there, about identifying my strengths and my gifts and identifying my life's purpose. But the bulk of that work was really very painful. And it is the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Most emotions that we have are divided into two categories: fear-based emotions and love-based emotions. And you have to actually study charts to sort of understand which type of emotions would be in those two categories. Things like anger, frustration, those are fear-based emotions. And so if you're in that place where those are the types of emotions that you're living with more regularly than not, go with that and start to explore that. I can do that for myself. And I'm very aware that that's a gift that God has given me, so that I have the ability to communicate what I've been through without evoking my own emotion.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here. And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma Podcast. I'm Amber Larkins, your host. And today I have with me a very special guest who is an empowered survivor, a healing mentor, a podcast host, a best-selling author, and an inspirational speaker. I want to welcome you, Miss Beth Jones, to our podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Amber. I'm delighted, and I've been super excited for this recording in particular to come. So let's have some fun.
I can't wait to share some of what you do with my audience and how you help people. I know that you and I have had conversations before this and just really align on so many things as far as just helping people and women and just being empowered in such a world that it's really hard to find that empowerment. But we're making changes and transformations, and so that's beautiful.
We are. Lots of changes, individually and collectively. So it's wonderful to watch happening.
Tell me a little bit about you, who you are, what you do. I know I gave a brief explanation, but tell my audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Generally, I would say to you that I'm an individual who has gone through radical personal and professional transformation. My personal transformation is the result of a healing journey that began for me in June of 2020. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, so I won't say too much more now, except that took me down a pathway of being really intentional and focused on healing myself from discoveries around trauma and abuse that I have suffered throughout my life. That discovery work led me to my life's purpose, to understand what my true life's purpose is, which led to my professional transformation. So personally, I was one person pre-healing, and I am the real me post-healing. Professionally, I went from being a corporate consulting executive who led teams doing major white-collar crime, fraud, and corruption bribery investigations around the world to that bio that you read about at the start, the empowered survivor, the healing mentor. I'm a podcast host, because I love the video format and I just discovered that word, best-selling author, and an inspirational speaker as well, to get my message out there, my healing message out there as far and wide as I can get it for other survivors.
I love it. And do you work with just women, or are you, do you work with men and women?
One of my favorite things to tell everyone is that trauma, abuse, survivorship, and healing know no demographic boundaries. So I work with men and women, all walks of life, because none of us are immune to experiencing what are human conditions: trauma, abuse, survivorship, healing, all human conditions. And newsflash for everybody who's watching this, every one of us out there have experienced some sort of trauma and abuse, and therefore we are all survivors in various places on our healing journeys. So my message, and the people that I work with, the people who I mentor, the people who I am trying to inspire, it's all of you, men and women.
Your book there, I see it behind you.
Yeah, there it is.
Who is this book aimed more towards? Is this people that have had physical abuse, all different types of abuse, or is there a specific type of trauma and or abuse that you're aimed at?
The book is for anyone who has experienced any sort of trauma or abuse. Now, I think probably the trauma and abuse that I'm getting at is more the type that we experience at the hands of another individual, whether we know that person or not, as opposed to, for example, being in a car wreck, like a, traumatic car wreck, or if we're dealing with a significant illness. Although those can also be trauma and abuse. And I think the healing principles that I talk about in the book, based on my experience, are universal, no matter what you survive. But I do spend quite a lot of time. For me, the word heal means to hope, evolve, and love, all in actions. And so I do talk in a section of the book about love, and that begins with the need for me and what was my experience to heal relationships that had hurt me and had caused me pain and caused me to live as an unhealthy survivor for a number of years. So I would say what's in there speaks more directly to relationship-based trauma and abuse, as opposed to a couple of other examples that I gave. But it's about healing your heart so that you can engage in love. So ultimately, the problem with not healing is that the emotions we carry inside of us constrain our heart and prevent us from being able to truly engage in relationships. And so I suppose, that even if you're dealing the example I gave of a serious illness that's threatening your life, I suppose that same thing could happen to you, where you have a lot of emotions inside of you that bind you up, where you are in a barrier state where you can't engage in healthy relationship with people who are trying to love you and to support you.
Tell us a little bit about your story and your background and kind of what has motivated you to get to the place that you're at today.
So my story begins at the age of 5. I was sexually abused for the first time in my life by my grandfather. And the same day, what I know now, hindsight's 2020 with what I've been through, but that same day is the day that I was pretty much shackled to the foundation of a wall that I would go on to build around myself for the next 45 years. And when I discovered it in June of 2020, it was that thick and that tall, 45 years thick and 45 years tall. And I had that event, the emotions that I had even at that very young age around that event, and then everything else that I would go on to experience for the next 45 years, other trauma and abuse and emotions that I became really, really good at putting all of that stuff into boxes. And each of those boxes became a stone in that wall that I built, and I never processed it. And it just grew and grew and grew. And then I had a life-altering event in June of 2020, and that's when I discovered the wall for the first time. And through my healing process, I very quickly found myself to be very lonely and alone behind that wall. And that was the result of the way that I'd lived my life. One of the two things in particular that caused me that loneliness and that aloneness, the isolation, as far as my survivorship goes, two things that contributed to that. So I suffer from dissociation, and that began with me as dissociative amnesia, which is, for me, is just not recording a lot of the event memories of things that have happened to me. I carry the emotion and very clear on what the emotion is, but I have difficulty sometimes describing the event that caused me to feel X way that I may feel. So that contributed to that sense of loneliness and being alone. And then I pretty much exiled everybody in my life who could have really supported me and who do love me and wanted to love me, but I just pushed them out of my life. And there were reasons for that. But that exile of my family, my parents, my sister, her kids, all of my close friends who I've known for most of my life in some cases, I just pushed them out of my life. And it's what I call exiling them. And then I created this very busy and chaotic life that I lived in. And all of those things just kept me further and further removed from deep relationships, including with myself. So I was, through all of that, really distracting myself and from the things that I needed to heal from. The start of my healing journey was divine. So I'm clear that everything about my life is divinely led. But from June of 2020, I can see the divinity so clearly, and it's so cool. Some of the things that I've experienced as I've walked, it was my time to heal. God, I think at that point in time for my life's purpose, which is to do the work that I do now, I think God was in a place of saying to me, you've lived enough. You've been a survivor. You've experienced enough in terms of how we survive after we experience various traumatic events in our life and abuse in our life. It's time for you to go on and heal. And then you're going to get to share that message with the world about what the healing journey is like, why we heal, my experience getting through the process, the painful parts of it, as well as the very joyous parts. And, at the end, my story is a happy story. That's why that cover of that book is a bright yellow. There's a dragonfly on it for a reason, but that bright yellow color is meant to say to people who see it, it's a happy story. And, I really am in a place now of wanting to share that story with other survivors, because I know firsthand that I don't, you don't, any survivor does not have to live their life encumbered by what somebody else did to them. And that's really what's happening when we don't heal, is we're giving somebody else our power, right? They are taking life from us. They are stealing our joy, stealing our happiness, stealing our love. Right? And that is giving our power to somebody else. And so this story is all about taking back power, becoming the empowered survivor, and not letting somebody else control the narrative. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd like to go a little bit deeper into this idea of carrying that trauma for a long period of time, because I think a lot of people do that. They'll stuff the trauma way back in, down deep inside, and then it starts to come out in these ways they're not really expecting. And for you, there was like a pivotal moment that kind of, hey, now I've got to focus on this thing. I've got to figure this out. And I think a lot of times that there is a moment in life where people are like, I've carried this long enough. I can't do it anymore. So can you talk to us a little bit more about the experience of carrying that for so many years and then reaching that pivotal moment? What did you do in that moment?
Yeah, so really I focus on the unhealthy survivorship, because the trauma and abuse in most cases, and even if you're in an abusive relationship where you're experiencing abuse on a regular basis, those are events that come and go. It's really the way that we live our life as an unhealthy survivor. And I would say that if you are in a place of continuing to live in an abusive relationship, that is part of your unhealthy survivorship, right? If you can't break free from that, you're not in that place of breaking free for whatever reason. So that's really what I focus on, right? And so I carried that, as I said, for 45 years. I think that the challenging thing that I experienced was that it wasn't until my healing journey began in earnest in June of 2020 that I became aware that I was carrying all of this. I went for 30 years. I had carried the original event that happened to me, and then some things that happened to me after that in high school, and the household that I grew up in as a child. I had carried those, I would say, in a subconscious state of my mind. They were there, but not in the forefront of my mind. And when I was 35, the sexual abuse by my grandfather when I was 5 came back. Wasn't really ready to deal with it, and I didn't deal with it. But I, at that time, had already begun a process of feeling something inside of me was not right. So, my healing journey in June of 2020 began with a hypnotherapy event that I went to for what I thought was a completely unrelated reason. I now understand the relationship of the reason why I went to hypnotherapy and how this all began for me. But for probably 20 or 25 years before that, I had tried to get help for one reason or another. The problem for me is I could not tell a therapist why I'm here to see you. Now, in my opinion, not as a trained therapist, but being the one who was doing this, I would sit in their office, and in most cases, every single session just sob, just cry uncontrollably. And I couldn't explain why. And I think that's why I didn't progress with them, because I was not able to give them a lead, a thread to pull on, something to work with. But I will also say that not one of those therapists ever said to me, wow, that's really strange. Maybe we should dig into this a little bit, because you've been in my office 4 times now in the last 4 weeks, and you cry every time. And that's not really normal. So let's dig into that a little bit and see what's going on. Right. I never had that happen to me. So I never progressed. I'm in this state for so many years where something was off, not right. I feel a need to get help. I can't tell you what it is. I don't know why. I'm trying off and on with various healing modalities and therapies. And all the while, I'm continuing to live in my unhealthy survivorship, dissociation, this crazy busy life that I built, exiling people, just, so I'm sort of in this place where I'm kind of doing this dance of I'm trying to heal. I'm just compounding what I'm doing to myself. It's what I call the wretched abuser. And that's us. It is the trauma that we inflict upon ourselves, the abuse that we inflict upon ourselves. And a great example of that is the inner critic. I had a very loud and powerful and sometimes very mean inner critic. And that trauma and abuse I'm inflicting upon myself, right? So I have both of these things going on over all that time, right? So living with it, I was alone and lonely when I discovered that wall. And so that was just growing over time. I literally had become emotionless, although a lot of my emotion I really started to lose at 5. My mom has said to me in recent years, we've talked some about this, that she's gone back and looked at photos of me over the years when I was growing up and was rarely smiling in those photos, or more of a, if I was, it was more of a smirk. And that's true, the photos that I've seen of myself as well. And that's because I was already in that emotionless state. So that's also happening with me, right? Where I'm literally really just losing myself. Certainly didn't understand the concept of love at all in any form, and, was unable to love and didn't have a lot of love in my life, right? So that's where I was at the point in time that I began to heal. The healing process itself, a lot of the work, the heavy work, is in the E for me, in my acronym for HEAL, which is to evolve. And that's divided into 2 parts for me. And one is about using the resources and tools that are available to any of us who choose to heal, finding the right combination of those tools and resources to help us to move forward. And we're all unique in what we've experienced in terms of the specifics of the trauma and abuse. We're all unique in the way that we've survived our lives. And therefore, we need our own unique combination of tools to help us to heal, those that work for us based on who we are as individuals. And so that's a huge part of evolving for me, is figuring out how to get that right for yourself so that you can progress and do the work. And the other part is about the self-discovery, right? And that is all of the hard things that are there, like how we're surviving, starting with the trauma and abuse, calling it what it is. That's hugely important, to be able to give it the credit that it deserves, right? And, an example of that for me is with my grandfather. For years, I would just tell you that he touched me inappropriately. Well, that's, yeah, yeah, he did, right? But it was, he sexually abused me. So let's call it what it is and give it the credit for what it is. And me as a survivor, the person who experienced that, I need to be able to do that, right? To call it what it really was, right? And so it's those types of things in the self-discovery. It's understanding the vulnerabilities and the things about us that cause us to be in an unhealthy state of survivorship, calling our unhealthy survivorship what it is. Me, dissociation, the exile of my family and my friends. I've struggled with substance abuse and alcohol throughout my life, really owning those things about us, the way that we survived our life that are not great. You need to do the positive work on that too, right? So I've intentionally done work to explore my strengths and my gifts, because we're all amazing, wonderful human beings, and we all have strengths and gifts. They just get a little clouded sometimes, and maybe even in my case, almost completely covered up by what we're carrying with us from the past. And I already mentioned, ultimately, life's purpose came out of that for me. And I think that's true for many of us. We can find our life's purpose through that discovery work. And it is the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, was to face all of that and to acknowledge it and have accountability, responsibility where I needed to label or address things, call things what they are. But that's hugely difficult, right? Even when you can be in a place of saying I was sexually abused as a child, that's still a lot of pain that goes with that, because I'm saying that about me, and that's hurtful, right? There's pain that goes along with that. So that work to uncover yourself, understand who you are and why you are who you are in the moment when you start to heal. And as you heal, is painful. And it is some of the most difficult work that I've ever done. But the healing journey as a whole for me has been exquisite and just simply beautiful. And I see where I am today, and it's so, so worth it. Ultimately being in a place of where I can really know, explore, and learn what love is, understand what love truly is across a wide variety of relationships, and then be able to engage in healthy relationships that give me that, feed me, that perpetuate that. That's the reason why we take the healing journey. That's why I took it ultimately. And that's why I think we all should take it, so that we can be in that place of being able to have those loving relationships, including with ourselves, the most important.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing here is trauma. It is unfortunate because I think trauma is something that affects so many people, everybody actually on some level.
Yes,
But
I agree.
I think if we can focus in on we have to do the hard stuff. I mean, anything worth having in life takes work. If you want to be healthy, if you want to be wise, you got to study. If you want to be healthy, you got to exercise and eat the right things. If you want to, you got to do the right things to build a mindset, to build a business, to whatever you're trying to build, you got to do the things, right? It takes work.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of times with trauma, the heart is kind of pushed on us. And it's so many people, they don't want to feel the heart again. But if we can get to that place where we can sit in that feeling for a moment and then be able to move from it. And when I say a moment, some traumas take a long time to get over. Some of them take a lifetime to work through. Some things you never get over, but working through those things and dealing with those emotions is so vital, because if not, it can manifest in being, you can be sick, you can get cancer, you can have triggering moments where you lash out at people, or you become angry, or you become, like you were explaining, you reflected inward and isolated and didn't really want to put yourself out there. And you get to a point where this is killing me. So
Yes.
you've got to go back and
Yes.
reface these things and revisit these things so I can heal from them. I like to give people this example of like having a wound. It's like if you have this wound and you have infection in it, you can't just put a Band-Aid over the wound. You've got to like dig out the infection. And I think trauma is very similar. I wish people could understand how vital it is to really heal from it, because I think people would be much happier and healthier. But in saying all of that, it kind of leads to this question, which I'm curious your thoughts on, is you take someone who knows that they have trauma, and some things they know what it's from. Sometimes we don't even know what it's from because our brain has that mechanism that stores it away, and we don't even know.
Yes.
But where do you start to say you're giving someone advice? Where do you say, hey, and they're like, I don't really know even where this is coming from. I just know I'm an angry person, or I just know I get frustrated with people. Like, what's that first level of defense that you kind of say, maybe explore here or explore there? Like, what advice would you give someone in that circumstance?
Those feelings that we have inside of us, and some of what you're describing there, anger and even frustration that comes out in our relationships, that's where we see it. Those are indicia that something is going on. And those are also threads, they're strings to pull on, right? And we need people to help us do that. I mean, I was an investigator for many, many years. And it's funny to me, it's one of the great ironies of my life is that I investigated some really complex schemes and violations of laws, and well, actually trying to hide evidence. And I was really good at finding that professionally in those cases and working with my team to do that. I was never able to do that for myself, though, until I found myself in the place of now I have to do it. So looking back, before I knew I needed to heal, and to your point, some of that stuff is buried, but no, it's there. But if there are behaviors and ways that you're acting that don't feel right, or you can tell from the way that you're interacting with other people, how they're receiving you, how they're responding to you, that's probably not the best. Those are threads to pull on. So I do think when you're in that place, and regardless of whether you know what you're dealing with or not, one of the keys and one of the crucial differences between my success pre and post hypnotherapy, which is kind of the boundary for me before where it didn't work and it did work. One of the crucial things was actually being with a trauma therapist, and even better, someone who understands what your particular traumas are. If you have any idea, even that slightest bit of a thread to be able to say, even if you say, I don't like this about myself, like I do this and I don't like it, or it doesn't feel comfortable, or I don't want to live my life that way anymore, right? Even if you can say that to someone who is skilled and is trauma informed, trauma trained, you're going to make progress with that because they understand how to heal through that and to help you figure out what's going on. And there are a lot of different healing modalities that therapists can use to help you uncover that stuff and process it out and reframe it make it more positive in the way that you think about it, the emotions you have attached to it, the way you think about yourself and talk about yourself, the inner critic, right? They're skilled to do that. So if you're feeling anything like that, go with it. Don't ignore it and pushing it aside and we're thinking it's something that it's not. I would encourage all of your listeners, if they're in that place, not to do that. There is fear, and I understand that. It is scary. And if you think you're going to go through and be triggered, or you're going to learn something about yourself that you don't want to know, maybe you're going to discover something in your family. All of that is really difficult and it's scary. And that's, almost in some cases can be immobilizing for some people. And I understand this. I didn't understand my dissociation the way it works for me. I didn't understand that when I first started trauma therapy. And I was operating under the assumption that my mind was repressing memories. I told my therapist, I was like, I don't, if it's repressed, I don't want to go digging it up because my mind says I don't need to know. So I don't need to know. But that was controlling my fear. Right. And so I get that is one of the main reasons why we don't heal is because we're so afraid of what we're going to learn. But I think we're also afraid of ourselves. Right. It's that fear of owning the things about us that are not great because we're living in unhealthy survivorship. Right. And that's scary to have to say that, I do this, I do that. I'm not a good partner. I'm not kind to my coworkers. I get angry. Over those things it's not fun to face those things about ourselves. But if you can do it and you do it in a proper way where you have a therapist who can help you through that and you're doing your own work in other ways as well, it's so worth it. So if you're feeling, if you're not feeling joy on a fairly regular basis, you're on the other side of that. What I would say, and if your listeners can go and look this up, levels of consciousness, most emotions that we have are divided into two categories, fear-based emotions and love-based emotions. And you have to actually study charts to sort of understand which type of emotions would be in those two categories. Things like anger, frustration, those are fear-based emotions. And so if you're in that place where those are the types of emotions that you're living with more regularly than not, start to explore that. And that is my absolute best advice. Those are threads. They are beginning of a healing process that if you can identify those to someone who is trained and skilled and experienced in being able to help you, that is an amazing place to start. Mm-hmm. Absolutely amazing. And the other thing I would say, my experience, if somebody says to you, you need help, listen to them, which was my experience directly. I have a very dear friend who was that blunt with me.
I think therapy is so important. I think all people need therapy. I wish I could have a coach and mentor and therapist in all areas of my life just because I'm hungry for self-growth. Yeah, and I do think what you said about being able to face things about yourself, that's hard to look inward at yourself and say, well, I'm this way. But if I've been in a lot of entrepreneurial circles, and this is like one of the things that they preach, because I think as an entrepreneur, you got to be bulletproof almost. The one thing that is like consistent is take responsibility for everything, even the bad things that happen. Try to take responsibility for those things, because when you look back, I can't change if someone's done me wrong or done me dirty or stole money or whatever. I can't change that, and I can't change that person. But what can I do if I reflect inward on myself? I can change that going forward. So I don't put myself in these situations anymore, or I create boundaries around this thing or whatever that looks like. So I think outward, or like looking inward to figure out how can that look different in the future? Because every situation that happens is a learning experience if we choose for it to be. But I think a lot of times people do take a victim mentality because it's easier. It's easier to just say, I don't want to look at it myself. I just want to blame someone else. And this is something I've really been thinking about a lot lately, actually. But when is the right time to share certain things? Like you said earlier about call things what they are. And I agree with you. But I also think that sometimes having grace for yourself and knowing that an event was so traumatic that maybe I can't even form my mouth to say what actually happened. Our brains have that mechanism where like we're not ready to like dig into that just yet. And it happens in levels almost. Having grace and understanding that if you're going through something, or if you're trying to get to the bottom of trauma or whatever it is that you're struggling with, knowing that it takes time, It takes a
Mm-hmm.
lot of self-reflection,
Mm-hmm.
maybe journaling. That's helpful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Praying, if you have someone you pray to,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very helpful. I just think that being able to take that in levels and not beat yourself up that you're not at that place just yet, because
Yeah.
sometimes trauma is hard and it takes a long time.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. And I would say to all of your listeners hearing me talk and being so direct about what I've experienced in terms of my trauma and abuse, I'm 4.5 years down a very intentional and focused path to heal myself. 2 years of really hard work and now being where I am today. I'm also in this world to spread my healing message. And one of the gifts that God has given me to be able to do that is the ability to talk to you about my trauma and abuse factually. And I did that for years professionally, is uncover facts and talk to people about just the facts. And I can do that for myself. And I'm very aware that that's a gift that God has given me so that I have the ability to communicate what I've been through without evoking my own emotion. Right. And so those two things together are why I can do that. And I think, not everybody's meant to be out there sharing their story broadly and publicly, being a healing mentor, which is my work in this life, right? Not everybody's meant to be doing that. So God's equipped me to be able to do that.
I think when you're on a self-growth journey like yourself and you get to the goal is to work up to be able
That's right.
to speak
That's right. That's
to
right.
speak frankly about it, because
That's right.
there are other people that
Yeah.
they're focusing on those words. They're focusing on those trigger words, and it's like they're calling themselves that. So for someone like yourself to step on the scene as a mentor and say, hey, you know what, this was sexual abuse and that's what it was, and that you never know like how that's going to help someone. I just wanted to make it really clear that sometimes if you can't even say it about yourself, like just have grace, because if you're on
Yeah.
that self growth
100%.
journey,
Yeah.
you're going to get to the level
You will.
where,
You will.
I mean, I can say that about my own personal trauma as well. Like there was things I felt immense shame over. And then it took time, years of
Yeah.
healing to
Yeah.
get to the place of now being able to talk frankly about it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I've said, I wrote this in the book, and I say this. And in fact, if you go on social media and follow me, which at some point I'll tell you where that is, I have a quote card out there from the book that I put out just probably a couple of weeks ago. It's fairly recent. But it says that, the person that I had the most grace for and acceptance of in this world is me. And I was the first, ultimately the exploration of love for me was God taking me through a series of events and teachings, learnings about self-love. And I had to get to that place where I have more grace for and acceptance of myself than I'm ever going to have for any person I'm ever going to encounter. And so I think you are 100% correct about that. And even, getting to the place where I am to be able to talk so frankly about what I've experienced. Two things I'll share about that. I carried, before I went to hypnotherapy, about 2 years before I went to hypnotherapy, I went to somatic movement therapy. I released a last in of emotions that were the first out of me as I began to release all the emotions that were in that wall that I was carrying. And this particular event was like an explosion. I was carrying shame and guilt around something that I had done that had caused my beloved dog. She was killed viciously and traumatically, savagely by another dog. And I had seen behavior between the two dogs. I could have prevented it, and I didn't. And there were reasons for that. And I obviously in my healing, I understand everything that happened. And part of that is forgiving myself because I needed to do that. But my point of this is that I carried that inside my body and I was literally rigid. And I had to go through that somatic movement therapy to expel that energy, that shame, and that grief that I was carrying. And that event happened 3.5 years before I had the somatic movement therapy. The only people who knew about what happened that night were me, my now ex-husband, the woman who owned the other dog, and the vet, because I would not tell anybody what happened to her. And people knew I loved her, and now she's gone suddenly. And I wasn't talking about why she was gone and what happened to her because I was so ashamed. Right? So it wasn't until I had processed that and worked through it, healed it, that I could actually talk about it. Right. And for me, that was a huge step in getting to these other emotions that had to come out of me. That was dislodged before I had the hypnotherapy, where I came to understand being abused by my grandfather and having to deal with that. The other example that I'll give with that is I was date raped and bullied in high school. And 4.5 years of working with my trauma therapist was the first time that I was able to verbalize what happened to me that day, completely get it out with my trauma therapist. So I'm working with this woman for 4 years who I trust implicitly. I think she's always going to be part of my support team and my support circle. And as much work as we had done together, my skeletons, she's been in the closet with my skeletons. She's been there. But it was 4 years before I could get that out. And the only reason that it came out when it did, I mean, it was, part of my divinely led path. I was working on feedback from the editor on my book. And she was like, if you could enhance this, because I had just barely said 2 words about it. And she's like, can we enhance this a little bit? But I had not dealt with it directly. I had not processed it. And so I couldn't verbalize it. I couldn't get it out. And I had to then, it was just time to do it. And so we did. And one day, finally, a flood of emotions and the words, the story came out of me, but then it was done. And so now, I have the ability I could write about it as I needed to. I can talk about it. And that's fairly recent for me. So, to your point, it is a process, right? And those are 2 really good examples of me having to go through the process. And I'll also say in my own time, when I was ready, not on anybody else's time, right? And that's true, for all of us, which I think is back to that grace for yourself, right? I mean, I understand now on my path how it's gone and why different things have processed when they process, but also why I held the emotion inside of me, right? I get that now. But I could only do that in my own time when I was ready to go through that process.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That's so true. And I think if people, especially when it comes to sharing, if people can kind of grasp that, where it's like, I don't have to feel pressure to share. I can share in small increments. I can talk about it on a surface level. And then as I feel comfortable, go deeper and deeper. But it's a great, it's a great thing to be aware of, I think, when we're sharing. And not all people are worthy to hear our traumas.
Like the people who hurt you.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and just there's some circles that it's like,
yeah, you're right. No, absolutely.
You have to almost be bulletproof to be able to share in some circles, because there will be judgmental people. There will be people look at you differently. So you have to know, you have to use wisdom, I think. And
you do.
And really be intuitive about, is this really the right time? And am I comfortable enough to share this on that level?
I would also say, though, if you are sharing and you are getting that, anything that feels like resistance or a lack of acceptance or judgment, right? I mean, those are, when I just talked about fear-based versus love-based emotions, those are on that fear-based side. And so what's happening? Those people who are coming at you that way are fearful. And that could be because you're pushing on something inside of them. They could be getting that push, one of those threads I talked about, right? So they're not looking at what's happening to them, the way they're responding as a thread, or reacting. I should say it's not responding, that's reacting, but pulling on a thread for themselves. I believe we're all had the experiences that we've had. And I believe that we're in an age now where there are more and more of us who are coming out with our stories in a very public way. And that's because we're meant to raise the vibrational frequency of the world, of society, of humanity, to change that level of consciousness to where more of us are living in love-based states of love-based emotions, right? More joy, more happiness, more love in our life. And there are more and more of us that are coming out and telling our stories. So we're supposed to be doing that. It's part of just collectively a collective healing that's going on. I know, Amber, you run into more and more people yourself who are experiencing this. I just feel like it's something that's meant to be happening. And so we're supposed to be sharing our stories. And the people who are resisting us, I think, are the very people that we're meant to be speaking with. I just understand for myself that whoever's doing that to me is in their own fear-based state. And it's probably because I'm pushing on something that they need to go do some work on. They need a little healing work themselves. Right.
That's right. That's so true. And I'm glad you said that. It's almost like you just dropped the mic. Just dropped it. I love it. Tell people where they can learn more about you, where they can find your book, how they can connect with you should they want to connect with you. Like where can people find you?
My website is empowered survivors with an S on the end.com. I'm sort of the first empowered survivor in my journey, but I'm on a mission to make more of us. So that's why it's empoweredsurvivors.com. You can learn all about me there and the work that I do to help people who are ready to heal, step on their healing journey, to inspire them and mentor them as they go through that process. Everything from the mentoring work to public speaking. The podcast is going to be up there soon because it's newly launched, but you'll have a page there where you can go see all those episodes on YouTube shortly, which brings me around to YouTube and the other social media platforms. Consistently across those, you can find me at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. That's my handle on all the major social media platforms and on YouTube. Love for your audience to connect with me, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. You can also hear the episodes from the show. It's called Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's the name of my show. And you can hear those episodes right now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts, with other platforms coming as I continue to make my way through that form of spreading my message.
I love it. And, there's so much power in sharing your story, sharing your voice, and then just using that to help others. There's a certain empowerment that comes with that in and of itself. So I always love connecting with other people that are just have a heart to really help people overcome trauma, because I am of the belief that trauma is one of these things. It's like the root problem. So if we can't deal with the root problem, how can we grow and thrive? It's almost like we're operating in a place of survivorship versus like a place of growth and thriving.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And encourage every person, like, get to the bottom of it. It takes time, effort, and energy and lots of healing, but get to the bottom of it for sure. What the things that bother you, so that you can heal and grow and live a life that's fulfilling. I think there is.
Yes.
If you had a final thought or something that you really wanted to leave my audience with, what would that be?
My final thought would be to encourage your audience to do the healing work to get past trauma and abuse. I think what you just said about trauma being the root cause of so many things that are not great in and around our lives is 100% true. So I would encourage your listeners, if you've got unprocessed trauma and abuse that you know about, process it, heal from it. And if you don't, but you're living in those fear-based emotions and other survivorship, if you're dealing with alcoholism, you're in unhealthy relationships, that's also probably part of the root cause there is trauma. So please, please pay attention to that. Listen, it's God knocking. It's God knocking. And I believe that pressure, once you're start becoming aware of that, the pressure goes up and up and up. That will keep knocking, and that pressure will keep going up and up and up. So if you're feeling that, please, please, please step on your healing pathway.
You are a light in the world, and I love being able to talk with people like yourself who are willing to share, because that's always difficult. But when you go on the healing journey and you're willing to share, you never know who is listening that needs your story. So take it easy on yourself. If you're listening, take it easy on yourself. Take the time to heal, top priority. But then once you're at that level, start sharing in increments and get your story out there and get your voice heard. Beth, thank you so much for spending the time here with us today. And I'll attach everything in the show notes for all of the people who want to get in contact with you. But I appreciate you so much and appreciate your message and your voice.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to have been here today. I appreciate it.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.